Hi everyone, my name's Ethan Ward and I'm originally from a small town in Oregon. I want to share something that happened when I was 13 years old, something that completely changed my life. It's not easy to talk about, but I'll tell it in simple words. Just as it happened, it was May 12, 1994, a normal Tuesday. I was in school, bored, watching the clock like any other kid. My last class that day was French, and I still remember looking out the window, excited to go home. My dad had asked my brother and me to help him deliver pamphlets that evening for a local charity event. It wasn't exciting, but it was family time, so we went along. After dinner, Dad drove us around town, stopping at different streets so we could slip flyers into mailboxes. It was almost sunset when we reached the last road, a narrow country lane outside town called Maple Hollow Road. The pavement ended halfway down, and trees leaned close to the road. Dad parked the car, and we got out to finish the last few houses. And that's where my memory stops. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital room, but not my hospital, not my bed. The light in the room was soft and orange. I saw my mom, my dad, and my brother standing over me, faces pale and worried. I had no idea why I was there. My head hurt, my leg felt heavy. When I asked what happened, Mom said softly, "You were hit by a car, sweetheart." They told me later that a car had come speeding around a curve while I was walking by the road. It hit me at nearly 40 miles per hour. In the US, at 30 miles per hour, you have about an 80% chance of surviving, but at 40 miles per hour, that flips. Only a 20% chance of survival. I was on the wrong side of those odds. Yet here I was. The doctors said I was very lucky. My left leg was crushed below the knee, shattered into pieces. My skull was bruised, and I had internal bleeding. They said if I hadn't been found within minutes, I wouldn't have made it. There was another small miracle too. The hospital I was taken to, St. Mary's in Portland, happened to have one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country visiting that week. He looked at my scans and told my parents that most doctors would have used metal pins and an external frame. That would have left me limping for life, maybe even in a wheelchair later on. But this doctor believed he could rebuild the bone by hand, carefully repositioning everything. My parents agreed, and somehow it worked. Months later, I could walk again. Even at 13, I understood that something special had happened. It felt like life had given me a second chance. But there was also something odd. While in the hospital, my parents bought me a new digital watch, same model as the one that broke in the accident. It worked for a day, then stopped. They bought another one. It stopped too. Later, I noticed my phone signal would vanish if I kept it too close to me, only to return if I placed it away. It sounds small, but it was strange enough to notice. Something in me had changed, something invisible, but I was a kid. I healed, I went home, and I got back to life. School, college, friends, eventually, marriage, everything looked normal on the outside, but deep down, something didn't feel right. It was like part of me never fully came back from that night. I couldn't explain it, so I buried it. I told myself to move on. For years I did, but life has a strange way of bringing the truth back, when you're ready to face it. After the accident, life slowly returned to normal, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. I went back to school, graduated, went to college, and got married in my 20s. I built a good life. People saw me as strong, dependable, and steady, but inside I carried a feeling I couldn't name. It was like a soft hum under everything, a quiet restlessness that never went away. I tried to fill that space with all the usual things: work, friends, sports, church, but no matter what I did, I felt disconnected from something, like I was living life on half volume while everyone else could hear the full song. When I turned 34, the past came back in a way I couldn't ignore. One morning, I woke up and couldn't feel my left leg below the knee, the same leg that had been crushed years earlier. There was no pain, just numbness. I could move my toes, but it felt like the power had been turned off. I tried to stand and fell right to the floor. At that time, I was working as a police officer. It was a demanding job, and the idea of being unable to move properly terrified me. I took time off and went through all the standard medical tests, MRIs, nerve studies, physical therapy. Nothing explained it clearly. The doctors said it might be nerve inflammation, or stress, or old damage from the accident flaring up again, but I knew it was something deeper. It felt like the same part of me that had gone missing years ago was stirring again. A friend suggested I visit an osteopath he knew, an elderly man named Henry Collins, who lived about an hour outside town. He had been a farmer most of his life, then trained in healing arts later. People said he had a calm spiritual way of working with the body. I figured I had nothing to lose. When I met him, he listened carefully, his eyes kind and clear. I told him about my leg, the accident, and how strange it was that it affected the same exact spot again. He nodded quietly, letting me talk. Then he said something that sent a chill through me. "Ethan," he said, "I don't think this is just physical. I think something happened to you that night you almost died, something you haven't remembered yet." I frowned. "You mean a near-death experience?" He smiled softly. "That's exactly what I mean." I didn't know what to say. I'd heard stories about near-death experiences, but never thought of myself that way. Still, something inside me reacted. It was like hearing a word I'd known my whole life, but forgotten how to speak. Henry walked over to a shelf and handed me a book, The Light Beyond the Door, by a nurse and researcher named Dr. Penny Shaturin. It was filled with medical studies and real stories of people who had died briefly and come back, many describing the same strange after-effects: sensitivity to electronics, emotional changes, a deeper sense of connection to life. I read the book that night, and page after page, I saw myself in those stories. People who couldn't wear watches anymore, people who felt lost for years, not realizing why, people who had touched something beyond death, and then returned, but I still had no memories of any experience, only a missing gap, a dark space in my mind that refused to open. That missing piece started to bother me deeply. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was there something I was supposed to remember, something that had been taken away from me, or protected until I was ready? A week later, I found an online near-death support group based in California. I wrote to them, explaining my situation, the accident, the electronics issue, the restlessness, the leg going numb again. I asked if anyone had ever regained lost memories years after their near-death event. A kind woman from the group replied. She said, "Yes, many people don't remember right away. Sometimes the memories return when the spirit feels safe." Her message hit me hard. When the spirit feels safe. For the first time in my life, I realized maybe I hadn't felt safe inside my own self for 20 years. Maybe part of me was still trapped in that moment, on Maple Hollow Road, waiting to come home. I started praying more often, not in a religious way, but in a quiet, honest way. "God," I said one night, "if there's something I need to remember, show me how." A few days later, an idea came to me suddenly: hypnotherapy. It was like a spark going off in my mind. I'd never tried it, but something deep inside said this was the way. I didn't know it yet, but that single decision would open the door to everything, not just the memory of what happened when I died, but why I came back. A few days after deciding to try hypnotherapy, I sat down at my computer and began searching for someone local. I found 3 names nearby, but one in particular stood out: Karen Blake. I can't explain it, but her name almost glowed on the screen. Something deep inside said, "That's the one." So I called. She didn't answer at first, but about an hour later, my phone rang. "Hi, this is Karen," she said warmly. "I got your message. You sound like someone ready to do some deep work." Her voice felt familiar, like talking to an old friend I hadn't seen in years. I told her about my accident, my leg issues, and how someone suggested I might have had a near-death experience. She listened carefully, then said, "Ethan, sometimes the mind protects you from memories until your spirit feels safe enough to face them. Let's see if we can help you remember gently." She gave me 2 options: a short introduction session or a full deep one. I didn't hesitate. "Let's go deep," I said. A few days later, I drove to her small office, a cozy wooden cabin on the edge of town. The room smelled like lavender and soft rain. There was calm music playing, and a large painting of a river hanging on the wall. She had me sit in a recliner, close my eyes, and focus on my breathing. "Picture a garden," she said softly. "You're walking down a stone path lined with tall trees. Each step you take leads you deeper into calmness. At the end of the path is a wall with many doors. Each door holds a memory, from this life, or maybe another." I began to feel light, as if my body was fading. The world around me softened, like I was half here and half somewhere else. She told me to walk to one of the doors. "Which one calls to you?" she asked. The first door that came to mind was made of rough wood, with an old iron handle. I opened it and saw a pair of worn leather sandals on my feet. I looked down and realized I was an old man wearing simple brown robes. My hands were rough, and I held a small wooden cross covered in spots of blood. The scene widened. I was in a stone church, dimly lit by candles. The air smelled of dust and incense. I felt heavy, burdened by something. Karen's voice floated in. Where are you? I'm a monk, I whispered. Somewhere in southern France. Long ago. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I knew it was real. I walked toward the altar, where a Bible lay open, but the words blurred before my eyes. I felt shame, deep shame, as if my faith had been used to hurt others. After the session, I learned there had been a group of monks during medieval times who were forced to participate in violent purges of other believers. The blood on my hands, the pain in my chest, it all made sense. Karen gently guided me out of that scene. Now, she said softly, choose another door, one from this life. I took a breath and turned toward another door. This one was brighter, glowing faintly around the edges. I opened it and felt my chest tighten. I was suddenly lying in a ditch beside a road, grass brushing my face. I was small again, 13 years old. I looked up and saw flashing red lights and heard the faint sound of sirens. My body ached everywhere. I'm back at the accident, I whispered. Karen didn't interrupt. She let me describe what I saw. I could see the ambulance parked nearby. Paramedics were rushing toward me, and then something even stranger happened. The scene froze, and a man appeared beside me. He looked familiar, though I'd never met him in life. Grandpa, I said quietly. He nodded, smiling kindly. Yes, Ethan, it's me. I've been watching over you. I started crying. My grandfather, Thomas Ward, had died before I was born. Yet here he was, standing by me, telling me that everything would be okay. He said, tell your mom I'm proud of her, and I'm proud of you too. But for now, close your eyes. You're going home soon. Then he placed a hand over my heart. I obeyed. The next moment, I wasn't in the ditch anymore. I was floating, above the ambulance, above the road, surrounded by light. The air was warm and soft, like sunlight made of love. Ahead of me was a glowing city of clouds, and in the distance, a tall figure walking toward me. Even under hypnosis, I could feel my whole body tremble. Karen whispered, you're safe, Ethan. What do you see? I whispered back, someone's coming. And as the figure came closer, I felt something I hadn't felt since that day. A wave of peace so deep, it felt like the air itself was breathing love into me. The figure came closer, and the light around him grew brighter. It wasn't blinding, it was warm, golden, and alive. Every part of me felt calm, like all the fear I had ever known was being washed away. He was dressed in simple white robes, not fancy or glowing, but pure. His face was kind, and his eyes were filled with something that words can't describe. Love so deep it made me want to fall to my knees. When he reached me, he knelt down, just as someone would kneel to comfort a scared child. Then he did something I will never forget. He placed one hand on my chest and the other on my cheek. Even though I was lying in Karen's office in that hypnotic state, I could physically feel the warmth of his hands. It was as real as the chair beneath me. He looked straight into my eyes and said, hello, my son. I am the Carpenter. I can't explain how I knew, but I immediately understood who he was. He didn't need to say his name. I knew it in my spirit. I know you, I said softly. He smiled. Yes, you do. You've always known me. The peace that came with those words was unlike anything I'd ever felt on earth. It wasn't just calm, it was home. The kind of peace that makes every question stop mattering. He continued, I love you as you love me, and you are special to me. You came close to staying here, but I have something more for you to do. I listened, trembling. I want you to let me speak through you, he said gently. When the time is right, I will use your voice to reach others. You won't remember this right away, only when you're ready. The way he spoke was not commanding. It was soft, like a father speaking to his son, asking rather than demanding, but his love carried a power that made me want to say yes without hesitation. I nodded slowly. I'll try, I whispered. He smiled again, and in that moment, I felt every part of my being, my memories, my pain, my guilt, lift like dust in the sunlight. It was like being made brand new. Then something strange happened. He stood and opened his arms wide, and I could see behind him a river of light flowing through the clouds, winding into a city that shimmered like glass and gold. I could hear music, but not made of instruments. It was made of feeling. Every note was like laughter, forgiveness, and love woven together. I wanted to stay. Every part of me wanted to walk into that city. I felt no fear of death, no sadness, no sense of time. But he looked at me and said, not yet. You have people to help. You have things to learn about love. Then gently, the light around him began to fade. The sound, the warmth, all of it started to drift away. like a tide returning to sea. Wait, I said, how will I know when it's time? He smiled. You'll know, my son, when your heart starts to speak louder than your mind. That's when I'll be there. And just like that, I was falling. It wasn't painful. It felt like sliding down through water, faster and faster, until I opened my eyes, and I was back in the ambulance, surrounded by bright lights and voices shouting. Pain rushed in, heavy and sharp. I could hear myself crying out for my mom. Karen's voice broke through gently. It's okay, Ethan. You're safe. You can come back now. I opened my eyes in her office, tears already on my face. My chest felt warm where his hand had been. The room was quiet, except for the sound of my breathing. I thought I had been gone 20 minutes, but when I looked at the clock, nearly an hour and a half had passed. I sat there in silence. Everything I thought I knew about life, about God, about love, all of it had shifted. I knew I had touched something eternal. That night, when I got home, I didn't turn on the TV or look at my phone. I just sat on my bed, staring at the dark window, whispering, "You're real, aren't you?" And deep in my heart, I heard the faintest echo, "Always have been." From that day on, I knew that whatever had happened wasn't just an illusion or a dream, it was a calling, and it had only just begun. For days after the session with Karen, I walked around in a daze. It wasn't the kind of confusion that makes you panic. It was quiet, slow, like trying to see through morning fog. Everything around me looked the same. The sky, my home, my wife, my job, but I wasn't the same man anymore. Something in me had shifted. The memory of the carpenter stayed with me every moment. I could still feel the warmth of his hand on my chest, and I could still hear his voice saying, "Let me speak through you." But instead of excitement, what I felt first was fear. I've never been a public person. Even as a kid, I was shy. I couldn't stand being the center of attention. Now I was being asked, by the Creator himself, it seemed, to speak to people about love, about God. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, staring at the trees and whispering, "You've got the wrong guy." But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. The love I'd felt in that realm was too real to deny. I just didn't know how to carry it without feeling unworthy. Still, I started to notice things. When people came to me, strangers, co-workers, even suspects I talked to as a police officer, they began opening up in strange ways. They'd tell me about pain in their families, about losing hope, about wanting to give up, and somehow I always knew what to say. Words would rise up in me, calm and clear, like they weren't mine at all. I would feel a heat in my throat and chest, and then the right thing would just come out. Once, a woman I'd arrested for shoplifting burst into tears, telling me her husband had just died and she didn't know how to survive. Without thinking, I said, "You're stronger than the pain. He's closer than you think." She froze and looked at me as if I'd read her soul. Later, she sent a letter thanking me for saving her life that day. It was moments like that when I realized maybe the carpenter had already been speaking through me for years, long before I remembered him. But there was also resistance inside me. I'd wake at night feeling anxious, wondering, why was I chosen to carry something so big when I could barely carry myself? My marriage started to fall apart around that time. We'd been growing distant for years, and now I understood why. I was changing, and she couldn't understand what was happening to me. I couldn't blame her. I didn't fully understand it myself. The only thing I knew was that this wasn't random. Something was pulling me toward people I was meant to meet, even as others quietly drifted out of my life. Then one evening, I got an email from the near-death support group in California. They thanked me for sharing my story and said they were forming local chapters to help people talk about their experiences. They asked if I'd help start one in Seattle, not far from where I lived. At first, I said no. The thought of leading a group terrified me, but something told me to stop resisting. The next morning, I woke with the carpenter's words echoing softly in my mind. "You'll know when your heart starts to speak louder than your mind." So I wrote back, "Yes, I'll help." A few days later, I got another email from a woman named Kelly Adams, who had also had a near-death experience. She would be helping organize the meetings. From her very first message, I felt that same instant familiarity I'd felt with Karen. She told me she believed people like us were being brought together for a reason, to heal others just by sharing love. Her kindness was contagious, and soon we were planning our first gathering. That meeting changed everything. It was in a small library hall with about 20 people, each carrying stories that sounded unbelievable to most of the world, but to us they were real. As I listened, I realized every one of us had been given a spark from the same light. Some saw loved ones, some saw angels, some met figures they couldn't explain, but the message was always the same. Love is real, and it never ends. When my turn came to speak, my hands shook, but as soon as I opened my mouth, the trembling stopped. The words just flowed. I talked about the Carpenter, about love, about the feeling of peace that never really left me. When I finished, no one clapped. They just sat quietly, some crying, some smiling, and I felt something settle inside me. For the first time, I understood this was how he wanted to speak. Through honesty, through love, through me. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without fear. A few months after that first meeting, Kelly invited me to have coffee at a small cafe near the waterfront. When I walked in, I spotted her right away. Long blonde hair, soft smile, and eyes that looked like they'd already seen heaven and come back with peace in them. When we spoke, it felt like we'd known each other forever. There was no awkwardness, no small talk, just instant understanding. She talked about her own near-death experience, how she'd been in a car accident and found herself surrounded by light beings who told her to help bring light into heavy places. She laughed softly and said, "That's what we're doing here, Ethan. We're turning heavy lives into lighter ones." Kelly had an idea to start a small online group where people who'd had near-death experiences or even just spiritual awakenings could connect daily. "We'll call it something positive," she said, tapping her pen on her notebook. "Something with hope in the name. How about the Positivity Circle?" Within a week, the group was online. Kelly ran it with such warmth that people from all over the world started joining. We shared stories, quotes, small miracles. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. It was there, one quiet evening, that another thread of light entered my life. Her name was Krista James. Krista lived in Florida. She had also died and come back during childbirth. Her story moved me deeply. She had been clinically dead for 2 minutes and described meeting a radiant presence that told her she would return to love through the impossible. At first, our conversations were simple, messages about faith, recovery, and purpose, but I noticed something strange. Every time she messaged, I'd feel warmth spread through my chest, the same warmth I'd felt in the presence of the Carpenter. One day, Kelly told me, "You two are connected. I can feel it." I laughed, brushing it off. "She's 4,000 miles away." Kelly just smiled. Distance doesn't mean anything to souls that already know each other. Over time, Krista and I talked more. Not in a romantic way at first. It was like we'd found a missing part of ourselves in each other. She understood the silence between words, the way time seemed slower after coming back from the other side. Meanwhile, our local support group grew. People came from different towns, each one with stories that bent the edges of what the world calls possible. Some saw angels, some spoke of lost loved ones guiding them. Others, like me, met beings of light who asked them to bring love into the world. Each story connected to the next, forming a pattern too perfect to be random. I started to see how God weaves lives together like threads, crossing paths, pulling souls toward each other until something beautiful forms. Kelly was the brightest thread of them all. She poured love into everything she touched, but she also carried pain that she rarely spoke about. One evening after a meeting, she said quietly, "Sometimes the light we carry burns too hot for this world." I didn't understand what she meant then. I would, later. Around that same time, Krista messaged me something that stopped me cold. "I had a dream about you," she wrote. "You were standing in a cloud, and someone behind you called you the Carpenter's voice." I sat there staring at her message, my heart pounding. I hadn't told her about my own experience in detail yet. Not about the Carpenter, not about what he said. "How did you know that?" I asked. She replied, "I just knew. I think our stories are pieces of the same book." That night I couldn't sleep. For years I had wondered why the Carpenter told me I wouldn't remember until the right time. Now for the first time it felt like the time had come. Krista and I began to talk daily. We'd pray together over video calls, talk about love, about healing, about what it meant to live between two worlds, one foot in heaven, one on earth. She had a way of reminding me who I was. When I doubted myself, she'd say, "You don't have to try to be light, Ethan. You are light. Just remember it." Looking back, I know that every step, the accident, the healing, The memory loss, the hypnotherapy, the fear, had been guiding me toward her, because sometimes, the people we are meant to find aren't new to us at all. They're old souls who promised to meet us again when the time was right, and for the first time in my life, I felt that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Months passed, and every day brought Krista and me closer, even though we lived thousands of miles apart. She was in Florida, I was in Oregon, but our conversations felt like they existed in a space without distance. When I'd wake up, she'd already be sending me small notes, gentle reminders to breathe, to pray, to stay in the light. Sometimes we'd talk late into the night about life, pain, and how strange it was to feel half here and half somewhere else. We didn't call it love at first. We were both going through changes, letting go of past lives, healing old wounds. But what grew between us was something far deeper than attraction. It was like remembering someone you'd always known but had forgotten existed. By the end of that year, Krista said softly one night, "I think I need to come see you." I laughed nervously. "You'd fly all the way here?" She smiled. "I think my heart already has." When the day came, I drove to Portland International Airport, feeling like my chest could burst. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It was late December, cold air, Christmas lights glowing, families greeting each other with hugs. And then I saw her. She walked out of the gate with a smile so bright that for a moment everything else disappeared. The crowd, the noise, even time itself. My legs almost gave out. It wasn't excitement. It was recognition, a shock of familiarity that said, "Oh, there you are." When we hugged, it didn't feel like meeting someone new. It felt like coming home. From that moment on, everything between us felt guided. We spent days walking by the river, talking about faith and purpose. When she spoke, I could hear echoes of the same truths the Carpenter had told me, about love, forgiveness, and how the heart speaks louder than the mind. One night, as we sat watching the rain hit the window, she said something I'll never forget. "Do you think we met before this life?" I smiled softly. "I think we never really said goodbye." It wasn't a line, it was truth. But what happened a few months later confirmed it. I'd been meditating more often, something I learned to do to keep calm. One evening, during a deep meditation, I found myself back in that familiar cloud space, the one I had seen when I died at 13. The air shimmered around me, and there, by a soft glowing lake, stood the Carpenter again. He didn't speak right away. He just smiled. His eyes carried that same mix of love and certainty, as if everything happening in my life was exactly as it should be. This time, he showed me something new. I looked into the lake, and in its reflection, I saw many versions of myself, infinite Ethans, living in different places, making different choices. Some stayed in that light long ago, some came back to Earth, but all of them were part of the same soul, learning in different ways. Then the Carpenter said gently, "You see, love doesn't end when you leave this world. It continues to weave itself through lifetimes, through choices, through hearts that promise to find each other again." As I listened, the reflection in the water shifted, and I saw Krista standing beside one of those versions of me, smiling just as she did at the airport, the same warmth in her eyes, the same soul. A voice, soft, feminine, full of light, spoke behind me. "Hello, my love. You don't know me yet, but when you go back, I want you to find me." I turned. It was her, Krista, or rather, her spirit, shining brighter than anything I'd ever seen, and suddenly, everything made sense. The connection, the timing, the distance, the years of waiting. She had been the one calling me back all along, the final reason the Carpenter sent me home that night at 13. The lake rippled, and her voice echoed again, "If you choose to return, come find me." When I opened my eyes, I was back in my living room, tears running down my face. The clock said nearly 2 hours had passed. I picked up my phone, and there was a message from Krista. "I just woke up from a dream," she wrote. "We were standing by a lake. You told me we'd already met before." I smiled through my tears. The Carpenter had been right. I would know when my heart spoke louder than my mind. And now it was shouting,